The day they buried George Voss, Eleanor stood beside the casket in a black dress she had worn 22 years before to his mother's funeral. The elbows had worn thin. She did not care. 42 years of marriage and the dress still fit. That felt like the only thing in the world that still made sense. George Voss was 68 years old. He had built their house with his own hands in 1978. Cut every joist himself set. Every window painted the porch swing the color of a Kansas morning sky. He had run a small agricultural repair shop on the east edge of Millfield, Kansas population. 1,200 sitting flat and stubborn on the western plains. He had gone down in that shop on a Tuesday in October, with a 14-millimeter wrench still in his hand. The man who found him was Connor, their youngest son. The undertaker later told Eleanor that the wrench had to be carefully removed from George's fingers. She was not told that part until 3 days after the funeral, and when she heard it, she did not cry. She had already used up her crying. She had done it alone in the bedroom the night before the service, with the door closed and the lights off, while the house was full of people who did not know how to be quiet. The service was held at Millfield Methodist, the same church where Eleanor and George had been married in 1978, the same church where all 3 of their children had been baptized, the same church where Eleanor had sung in the choir for over 2 decades, until her knees made the wooden pew steps too difficult on cold mornings, October in Kansas. A cold rain that came sideways off the plains and found every gap in a coat collar, every space between button and buttonhole. Farmers around Millfield called it late rain, the wrong kind. The kind that arrives after the soil has already cracked and hardened and cannot absorb it anymore. Garrett was first in the family row beside Eleanor. He was 44 years old. He had borrowed his brother-in-law's suit. His hair was slicked back in a way that reminded Eleanor of a man preparing to close a deal rather than bury his father. Garrett ran a real estate brokerage out of Wichita called Voss Property Group, which he had renamed 3 years ago after a partnership had dissolved badly. He had been moving through the receiving line all morning, telling people that his father was a tremendous man. Eleanor had walked past the open bathroom door that morning and seen him practicing the phrase in the mirror. A tremendous man. He said it the way someone might describe a quarterly earnings report that had exceeded projections. Lorraine was beside him, 40 years old. She was wearing a dark blazer and sunglasses inside the church, which Eleanor noted but said nothing about. Lorraine worked as an office manager at a dental practice in Topeka. She had been married for 11 years to a man named Phil, who had not come to the funeral because of a work obligation that had somehow materialized the evening before the service. Phil always had work obligations that materialized at inconvenient times. Lorraine was crying, which Eleanor would give her credit for. Real tears. But every 4 or 5 minutes she pulled her phone from her jacket pocket, tapped something and put it back. Eleanor watched this happen without turning her head. By the time the service started, Lorraine had posted a black and white photograph of George from 1979 to her social media page with a caption about angels in heaven. And several hundred people Eleanor had never met were telling her daughter how strong she was. Then there was Connor. Connor was not in the church. Eleanor saw him through the stained glass window above the altar, the colors bending the image into something impressionistic. He was outside in the rain. He was wearing the same flannel shirt he had worn since he was 30 years old. The same worn jeans, the same work boots. His hands were dark with grease and rain. He was crouched at the front gate of Millfield Methodist, which had lost its hinge the week before in a windstorm. The church trustees had been arguing about who would pay to fix it since the following Sunday. Nobody had asked Connor to fix it. He had simply seen that it was broken. Eleanor watched his shoulders curve over the gate. She watched him work the way he always worked, with a completeness of attention that she had never quite understood and had spent years misinterpreting as stubbornness. The rain came down on him and he did not look up. His father was lying in a wooden box 20 feet from where he stood, and Connor Voss was fixing a gate that nobody had asked him to fix. She thought, there he goes, same as always. Cannot even come inside to say goodbye properly. She did not know, standing there watching him through the colored glass, that this was the first time in 11 years that Connor had set foot on the grounds of Millfield Methodist. She did not know that he had driven past this church dozens of times in the past decade and had not been able to make himself turn into the parking lot. She did not know that the last time he had stood inside this building, he had been 25 years old and still drinking, and something had happened that he had not told anyone about, and that he had been carrying it alone ever since. She did not know any of that. She just watched him work. The service ended. The rain continued. People came back to the house, the 2-story white farmhouse on Hollow Creek Road that George had built with those same hands that now lay folded in a funeral home casket. The church ladies brought the food they always bring: tuna casserole, fried chicken from the Methodist cookbook, potato salad with too much mustard, a green bean dish that no one touched. Eleanor sat in the front room and received people. She said the same things 63 times because she counted. He was a good man. Thank you for coming. He would have appreciated that. He is at peace now. She smiled 63 times. Her jaw ached. After about an hour, her throat had gone dry, and she stood to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The kitchen door was open approximately 3 inches. She stopped in the hallway when she heard the word money. Garrett was on one side of the kitchen island. Lorraine was on the other. They were speaking in low voices, the way grown children speak when they believe their mother is too consumed by grief to be listening. Coffee cups in their hands. The fluorescent light overhead made the kitchen look like a room in a hospital. Eleanor stood still. Garrett said, "Linda, we need to talk straight." He used Lorraine's middle name when he was being serious about something. Linda. Lorraine had always hated being called Linda, their grandmother's name, a name that belonged to another generation. Lorraine said, "I know." Garrett said, "Mom does not have much left. You have seen the joint account. Dad put everything into that shop. Those old machines. He burned through it, Linda. There is almost nothing." Lorraine said, "So what do we do?" It was not a question. It was an opening. Garrett said, "We sell the house. It will bring $220, maybe $240 with updated kitchen staging. We put Mom in Sunrise Manor, the memory care facility off Route 9. I already called them. They have availability. We split what remains after her care costs. Clean." A pause. Lorraine said, "What about Connor?" There was a short sound from Garrett, not quite a laugh, more like a period at the end of a sentence that needed no further elaboration. He said, "Connor has been eating off this family his entire adult life. He has never contributed anything real. He does not get a share. We are not giving a third of everything to someone who spent 20 years making choices that cost all of us." A long silence. Then Lorraine said, "Yeah, you are right." Eleanor stood in the hallway with the empty water glass in her right hand. Her left hand had found the wall, not because she needed to steady herself, because if she let go of the wall, she was going to walk into that kitchen and say things that could not be unsaid in a house full of mourners who had come to honor her husband. She breathed once. She breathed again. She turned around. She walked back into the front room and smiled at the woman from the Methodist Women's Circle who was waiting to offer condolences. "He was such a good man, Eleanor. Thank you. He would have appreciated you being here. 64. After everyone had gone, after the church ladies had washed the dishes and covered the leftover casseroles and stacked everything neatly on the counter. The way church ladies do after Garrett and Lorraine had settled into the downstairs guest rooms, and the house had gone quiet. Eleanor climbed the stairs slowly. The third step still creaked. George had been meaning to fix it since 1990. She went into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed she had shared with her husband for 42 years. She did not cry. She had finished crying 3 nights before alone when no one was watching. That was when she had done her grieving the real kind, the quiet, unseen kind that leaves no performance for anyone else. She lay on her back and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that George had been promising to paint over since the spring of 2011. And she thought about what Garrett had said. Connor does not get a share. She thought about Connor, about Thanksgiving of 2017, the last time he had sat at her table. He had come back from a stretch of time in Tulsa that had not gone well in the way that several years of his life had not gone well in the way that she and George had watched from a distance and disagreed about how to handle and never quite agreed. He had been drinking. He had asked his father for help quietly in the hallway, but the house had been full and the conversation had not stayed quiet for long. Eleanor had stood up in front of everyone at that table, Garrett and his then wife, Lorraine and Phil, the grandchildren, George's sister, and she had said to her youngest son, in a voice that left no room for misunderstanding, that he was the biggest disappointment of her life. She had used those exact words. Connor had set down his fork. He had stood up from the table. He had walked out of the house without his coat. He had not come back to her table in the 6 years since. Eleanor lay in the dark, and she thought about George, about the shop, about all that money that had supposedly burned through. But Eleanor Voss had been married to George Voss for 42 years, and she knew certain things about him. The way you know things about the landscape you have looked at every day of your life. George Voss saved coins in mason jars in the basement. George Voss had worn the same pair of work boots for 9 years and resoled them twice. George Voss had once driven 45 miles out of his way to find a fuel line component that cost $7 less than the one available in town. George Voss did not burn through things, so where had the money gone? She lay in the dark and she made a decision. If her 2 oldest children were already prepared to bury their mother alongside their father, she would give them the chance to do it slowly. She would show them exactly what they believed they were seeing. She would give Garrett and Lorraine the story they had already written for her, and she would learn once and for all what her children were made of when the stakes were real. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time, but eventually she slept. And in the morning, Eleanor Voss began to forget things. She made coffee at 5 in the morning, the same as every morning for 4 decades. She stood at the kitchen sink and looked out the window past the porch, past the yard out to where George's shop sat square and dark in the field 200 yards from the back of the house. The padlock on the door was new. Connor had the key. She had not asked him for it. She opened the bottom drawer of the kitchen cabinet and took out a red spiral notebook. College ruled the kind she had used for lesson plans in her years at Millfield Elementary. The cover still said, "Property of Mrs. Voss, room 12. She sat down at the kitchen table and she wrote 5 things. Step 1, research. Step 2, practice. Step 3, symptoms. Step 4, witnesses. Step 5, patience. That afternoon, she drove the Buick into town. A 2006 LeSabre dark blue, 130,000 miles on it. A dashboard rattle that no mechanic had ever been able to locate. George had bought it used in 2010 from a man in Augusta. Eleanor parked it in front of the Millfield Public Library, the same building where she had brought Garrett to Story Hour in 1982, where Lorraine had won the summer reading contest 3 years in a row, where Connor had once been escorted out at the age of 14 for reasons that the librarian at the time had described as a disruption to the general peace. The librarian now was a woman named Doris Pratt. She was 60 years old, had been running the Millfield branch since 2014, and had taught Sunday school alongside Eleanor in the early 90s. She looked up when Eleanor came through the door. "Eleanor, honey, I am so sorry about George. Thank you, Doris. I appreciate you. How are you holding up?" Eleanor paused. She let the pause run 2 beats longer than natural. She let her eyes drift toward the far wall. She let something uncertain come into her expression, a softness at the edges, a slight unfocusing of attention. "I am managing," she said. "I was hoping you could help me find something. I have been looking for information about a condition, about memory, about the illness, the forgetting one." She let her voice trail away. She let Doris fill in the space. "Oh, Eleanor. Honey. Come here." Doris came around from behind the desk. She put her hand on Eleanor's arm in the way that women in small towns put their hands on the arms of women who appear to be suffering. Her eyes were soft with concern, and with the particular alertness of someone who has just received information worth knowing. "Are you having symptoms?" she asked quietly. Eleanor said, "I don't know." By the time Eleanor left the library 40 minutes later, she had 4 books in her arms. She had spoken slowly. She had repeated herself twice deliberately. She had asked where the section on health was, even though she had used this library for 30 years and knew exactly where it was. Doris had walked her there with a hand on her elbow. Eleanor was not concerned about the walk. She was not particularly focused on the books, though she intended to read all of them carefully. What she had come for was the conversation, because in Millfield, Kansas, population 1200, Doris Pratt's daughter worked at the hair salon on Main Street, which was where Garrett's former administrative assistant got her highlights done every 6 weeks, which meant that the information Eleanor had just planted in the Millfield Public Library would reach her children within 10 days. Probably less. That was exactly the point. She read for 3 days. She made notes in the margins the way she had always made notes, precise and purposeful. She underlined passages. She dog-eared pages. What she learned was not what most people imagined when they heard the word dementia. It was not in its early stages the dramatic and obvious decline of the movies. It was not constant fog. It was not confusion about fundamental things. Early-stage cognitive decline was subtle. It was word-finding pauses. It was misplaced objects. It was questions repeated within 15 minutes. It was calling a child by the wrong name or by the name of another family member, or by a name that belonged to someone from a different decade of your life. It was confusion about dates, about what day the week had reached, and crucially, early-stage patients almost universally retained what was called procedural memory, old skills, cooking, driving familiar routes, playing an instrument. The body remembers even when the words begin to leave. This was important, because if Eleanor stopped cooking, people would know something was wrong in the wrong way. But if she cooked the same pot roast she had been making since 1975, and then called her son by his father's name while setting the table, that would be exactly right. She practiced in the bathroom mirror. This is the part no one ever discusses, the part that requires actual work. You cannot simply walk around acting confused. Real cognitive decline has texture. It has a quality that is not confusion exactly, but rather a specific kind of delay, a reaching that does not quite arrive. The eyes do not go blank. They drift. They find a point somewhere over the shoulder of whoever you are speaking to. The hands do not shake randomly. There is a hesitation, a hovering that belongs to a very specific kind of uncertainty. Eleanor stood in front of her bathroom mirror and said, "What day is it?" She watched her own face. The expression was not right. She tried again. She let the brow furrow halfway, not all the way, not performatively. She let her mouth open slightly, the beginning of an answer that could not quite reach the surface. She let her eyes find a spot approximately 18 inches above and to the left of where she was looking. "What day is it?" Better. She tried it again. "What day is it?" She practiced for 2 hours. By the end, she could produce the full sequence in under 4 seconds. Question. Furrow. Drift. Pause. Partial recovery. Apology. She had been a classroom teacher for 30 years. She knew how to perform for an audience, how to hold a room, how to adjust her presentation based on what she saw on the faces in front of her. She was very good at this. She practiced misplacing objects. This required more thought than it sounded like it should. The obvious choice keys in the refrigerator was the kind of thing you saw in movies. It was too large, too deliberate. Anyone who had done even a little reading about dementia would recognize it as a cliché. Eleanor needed something stranger and quieter. She put her reading glasses into the cardboard box of laundry detergent, not on top, but beneath a layer of powder sealed the top, and returned the box to the shelf in the laundry room. When she needed her glasses several days later, she would search for them visibly, in the places a person would reasonably search. And eventually she would find them by accident while doing a load of laundry. She would hold them up and say with a small, bewildered laugh, "Oh, goodness, how did those end up in there?" And whoever was watching would not laugh. She also practiced the hand tremor. A woman of 65 who had recently lost her husband of 4 decades was not unusual to have some physical manifestation of grief. Grief did things to the nervous system. Doctors knew this. Eleanor had read about it. She practiced making her teacup rattle very slightly against the saucer when she set it down. Not enough to spill anything, just enough for someone across a table to notice and file away. Then she did the hardest thing on her list. She sat at the kitchen table with the leather address book George had given her for Christmas in 1987, and she found the number for Dr. Warren Aldrich, who had been the Voss family physician for 30 years. He had delivered Lorraine. He had set Connor's broken wrist twice. He had been the person who 6 years ago, in 2017, had told George privately that his heart was failing. Eleanor picked up the telephone. Warren Aldrich answered on the second ring. "Aldrich." "Warren." "It is Eleanor." A breath. His voice changed. "Eleanor, I have been meaning to call since the service. I did not know what to say." "I need a favor," she said. "And I need you to keep it between us the way you kept George's condition between you and him for 6 years. A long silence on the other end. Then quietly you found out. "I found his pill bottles last week," she said. "Statins, beta blockers, prescriptions dated 2017. He never told me." She paused. "I am not angry at you, Warren. George had his reasons for everything. He always did. But I need your help with something now." She told him what she needed. An informal letter. Not a diagnosis, she was careful to say, that not a clinical finding. Just an observation expressed in the language of medicine on letterhead with a signature. Possible early-stage cognitive decline. Recommend family monitoring. Avoid major unilateral decisions until further evaluation. Something her children might see if they came looking for it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Eleanor, are you certain about this?" She looked out the kitchen window at George's shop, at the heavy padlock on the door, at the Kansas sky going white and cold above the roofline. "I am certain," she said. He said, "If this goes further than you intend, if it gets away from you, you call me." "I promise," she said. She called Garrett that same evening. He picked up on the fourth ring. He sounded distracted, slightly rushed, the voice of a man in the middle of something he considered important. "Mom. Hey, is everything okay?" She had practiced this, too. She let the silence go a beat too long. She let her voice come out smaller than its natural register. "Garrett," she said, "I called because I was going to. I was calling because I had a question." About she let it hang in the air. She let it dissolve before reaching its destination. "I am sorry, honey." "What was I calling about?" The pause on his end was short. Then his voice shifted. She recognized the shift. She had heard that particular quality of voice before in the voices of people at estate sales, in the voices of volunteers who asked to carry something for an elderly neighbor. "Mom," he said, "are you doing all right?" "I am fine. I have just been forgetting little things." "Since your father?" "I have not been sleeping well. Mom, you should see a doctor. See Warren Aldrich." "I do not want to bother him," she said. "He has enough patience." No, call him. I think you should call him tomorrow." "All right," she said. "If you think so, sweetheart." She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at her reflection in the dark window above the sink. She smiled. The seed was in the ground. 14 days after the funeral, Garrett drove down from Wichita in his Lexus SUV. Lorraine came as well. Eleanor had not been told they were coming together, but she had expected it. They had been on the phone with Warren Aldrich. He had said exactly what Eleanor had asked him to say. Possible early-stage cognitive decline. Family support recommended. No formal diagnosis at this time. It was enough. Eleanor knew they were coming because Lorraine had called the night before to say she would be stopping by the way you call to announce a visit that has already been scheduled with someone else. Eleanor put on the blue cardigan she wore most mornings. She buttoned it carefully. Then she unbuttoned the third button and buttoned it again, one button off so the collar sat crooked on her left shoulder. She looked at herself in the hall mirror for a long time. It took everything she had not to reach up and fix it. She went to the door when she heard the Lexus in the driveway. Lorraine hugged her hard at the threshold. Both arms, the kind of hug that expressed something between genuine feeling and managed performance. "Mama. Oh, Mama, I have been so worried. I am fine, sweetheart." Garrett kissed her forehead. He smiled the way men smile when they have made a decision and are waiting to announce it. "Mom," he said, "we are going to take care of everything." Eleanor looked up at him. She let her eyes do the thing she had practiced. Let them go slightly past his face to a point over his left shoulder. She said, "Garrett, you look like your father when you is your hair wet." His eyes cut immediately to Lorraine. Lorraine's hand went to her mouth. Eleanor watched both of them through her drift. Neither of them said anything to correct her. Neither of them said, "Mom, I am Garrett, not Dad." Neither of them said, "Dad is gone." They exchanged a look. The look said exactly what she had needed it to say. She made pot roast for dinner. She had been making it since 1975. She could make it in her sleep. She did not make a single error. She did not forget the bay leaf or the Worcestershire at the end. That was important. A woman in early cognitive decline did not forget how to make pot roast. The hands remembered long after the words had started to go. But halfway through the meal, sitting at the table where she had fed these children every night for the better part of 2 decades, Eleanor looked at Garrett with an expression of courteous confusion. "Are you married, dear?" she asked. "Do you have children?" Garrett set his spoon down slowly. "Mom," he said, "I am divorced. I have Tyler and Madison. Tyler is 15 and Madison is 12. You have spent time with both of them every summer." Eleanor let her gaze go soft. "Tyler," she said. "Madison. Yes. Of course. I am sorry. I just got confused for a moment." She looked down at her plate. She let her hand tremble slightly on the spoon, just enough. Just the amount she had practiced. From across the table, in the reflection in the darkened window behind Lorraine's head, Eleanor saw her daughter hold up her phone just below the level of the table. The screen angled toward Eleanor recording. She did not move her eyes from her plate. She thought, who is that recording for Lorraine? She had an answer forming already, but she would not learn it confirmed for another 3 weeks. After the dishes were cleared and both of her older children had gone to bed, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table in the dark. She listened to the house settle. The refrigerator cycled. The third stair creaked at 2 in the morning. She lay still in her bedroom and tracked the sound. Down the hall, George's study. The desk drawer sliding open. Papers moving. Garrett was looking for the will. He was looking for bank statements. He was looking for the financial picture of whatever remained. She lay in the dark and thought, "Keep looking, son. You will not find what is not there to find." What was there in the bottom right drawer, paperclipped to the back of a 1989 tax return, was a yellow envelope. Garrett missed it because it was attached to the most boring document in the drawer, which was exactly where George Voss had always put the things that mattered most. Underneath something that made a person stop looking. In the morning, they came at her together, both of them at the kitchen table with coffee cups. Gentle voices. Garrett first. "Mom, we have been talking. We are worried about you." "I am fine, sweetheart." "Mom, you called me Dad last night. You forgot Tyler and Madison." She looked down at her sweater. She smoothed the crooked collar with a confused hand. "Did I did not notice. I am sorry." Lorraine leaned in. "Mama," she said, "there is a place near Wichita, Sunrise Manor. They have nurses around the clock. They have activities. You would have company. You would not be alone here." Garrett said, "Just for a few months, Mom, while Warren adjusts your medications. Then you come home." She looked at him. He held her gaze with steady, practiced warmth. "While Warren adjusts your medications." She had no medications. Warren Aldrich had given her no prescriptions. There was nothing to adjust. Garrett knew that. But he said it anyway in his soft voice, with his hand over hers on the kitchen table. She let her eyes fill. Just slightly. "What about the house, Raymond?" she said, using a name that belonged to no one in this family. A name she had picked carefully the week before, because it sounded like the kind of name a confused woman might grasp for in the place where a familiar name should be. Neither of them corrected her. "Don't worry about the house," Garrett said. "I will handle everything while you are getting better. You just need to sign a power of attorney so I can manage things on your behalf." He pulled a folder from his briefcase. It had already been prepared. The paperwork was already typed and tabbed. He had brought it before he had seen her, before he had confirmed anything. The lawyer in Wichita had prepared it before Garrett had set foot in this house. Eleanor picked up the pen. Her hand trembled. She made it tremble. But underneath the trembling, her mind was moving in straight, clean lines, because she had prepared for this moment 2 weeks ago, at this exact table. She signed. She signed it the way a woman signs her name when her mind is no longer entirely reliable. Too large, too loose. The capital E collapsing into something unrecognizable, the V in Voss unfinished at the bottom. It was not her signature. It bore no resemblance to the signature on her driver's license on 30 years of school district paperwork on every birthday card she had ever sent her grandchildren. Upstairs in a folder in the nightstand beside her bed were 23 samples of her real signature, collected from bank records and legal documents and personal correspondence going back 15 years. Every single one of them showed the same precise schoolteacher's hand, the same firm capital letters, the same clean close of each name. What Garrett held in his hand would not match a single one of those samples. Not one. She handed him the pen back. He smiled. He had no idea. There was a knock at the front door. Connor was on the porch. He was wearing the same flannel shirt he had worn to the funeral. His knuckles were scabbed from something he had been working on that morning. His hair was damp with fog. He was holding a small wooden box in both hands. Smooth pine dovetailed corners George's work. She recognized the joinery immediately. "Mom," he said, "I found this in the shop. It belongs to you." He held it out. She took the box. Inside was George's reading glasses, the Timex watch he had worn every day since 1974, and a black and white photograph of Eleanor at 23 on her wedding day, laughing at something George had just said. Her head was thrown back. Her eyes were completely closed from laughing. Something cracked open in Eleanor's chest. She looked up at Connor. She made her eyes do the thing. "Thank you," she said. "Who are you?" Connor's face did not change. His expression did not shift into the theatrical grief or the impatient correction or the careful management that she had seen on her other children's faces for the past several days. He just looked at her, quietly, the way George had always looked at things before he spoke about them. "I am Connor, Mom," he said. "I am your son." Garrett stepped forward. "Connor," he said, "Mom is not well. We are taking her to Sunrise Manor today. It is already arranged." Connor looked at Garrett. He looked at Lorraine, who had appeared in the hallway behind Eleanor. He looked at Eleanor. His eyes moved over her face the way someone reads a map, not quickly but with real attention. He said, "Who decided that?" Garrett said, "Lorraine and I." "It is the right thing." Connor said, "You got an opinion you want to share, brother." "Just one," Connor said. "Give me the phone number for Sunrise Manor." Lorraine wrote it on the back of an envelope. Connor took it. He looked at Eleanor one more time. He nodded once the same way George used to nod when he had understood something and did not yet have words for it. Then he turned around and walked back to his truck. She heard the engine. She heard the gravel under the tires. She held the wooden box against her chest and watched him go. That afternoon, Garrett drove Eleanor to Sunrise Manor in the Lexus. The seats were heated. He played public radio. She looked out the window at the brown fields, at the bare-limbed cottonwoods, along the creek beds, at a red-tailed hawk sitting on a fence post, watching the ground below with the absolute patience of something that had all the time there was. She thought about Connor's question, who decided? And for the first time since she had made her decision, in that hallway with the empty glass in her hand, a thought slipped past the careful architecture she had built around herself. It was small and she almost did not notice it, and she pushed it away almost immediately because she could not afford to hold it yet. But she noticed it. The thought was, what if I have been wrong about him? What if I have been wrong about him for longer than I know? She pushed it away. She was not ready for it. They pulled into the parking lot at 4:30 in the afternoon. Gray building, 2 stories. A concrete walkway lined with ornamental grasses that had gone brown in the October cold. An American flag on a pole near the entrance moving slowly in the plane's wind. Garrett parked. He came around to her door. He carried her suitcase. She carried the wooden box. He did not ask what was in it. He walked her through the automatic doors and introduced her to a woman in blue scrubs and handed her off with the efficiency of a man who had a 4:30 showing scheduled in Wichita and needed to be back on the highway within the hour. He did not call that night to ask how she had settled in. He did not call the next night either. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed in room 14 of Sunrise Manor Memory Care and looked out the window at the parking lot below. A dumpster. A chain-link fence around an HVAC unit. A sodium light coming on as the afternoon darkened into early evening. The mattress under her was thin. The sheets smelled like industrial bleach. The pillow was approximately the size of a folded dish towel. In the other bed, a woman named Doris Hensley, 82 years old, middle-stage Alzheimer's, was asleep with her mouth slightly open and her hand resting on her chest. Fingers loose the way hands go when the grip on waking life has begun to ease. Eleanor set the wooden box on the nightstand. She opened it and took out George's Timex. She wound it. She put it on her wrist. It was too large. It slid down toward her knuckles. But the ticking was steady and audible, and it was the loudest sound in the room. She was 65 years old. She had buried her husband 12 days ago. She had planned and researched and practiced and signed and given up her house and her kitchen and her third step creek and her view of George's shop. She had done all of this on purpose with full awareness as a woman who was in complete command of her faculties and intended to remain so. She was not afraid. But she was tired in a way she had not anticipated. She looked at the parking lot. She thought about Connor's truck pulling out of the driveway that morning. She thought about his question. She listened to George's watch tick against the bone of her wrist, and she began very quietly to count. Eleanor Voss counted things the way she had always counted things. She had been counting since her first year in the classroom, when she learned that numbers were the only language that did not leave room for interpretation. 30 children in a room. 20 minutes for a lesson before attention began to fracture. 6 words on a spelling list were manageable. 8 were optimistic. 10 were a mistake. Numbers told the truth in a way that words sometimes refused to. At Sunrise Manor Memory Care, she counted everything. The nursing staff made 4 visits to her room each day. Morning medications at 7. Vitals check at 11. Lunch tray delivery at noon. Evening medications and what they called a comfort check at 8, which in practice meant a brief look through the doorway to confirm that neither resident was in distress. 4 visits. Across 6 weeks, that would be 168 visits. Eleanor kept a small tally in the back of the red spiral notebook she had brought from home, hidden inside the cover of the Pickwick Papers, which she had been rereading slowly for 40 years and had still not finished. Meals were served 3 times daily in the common dining room down the hall, or brought to the room for residents who were flagged as requiring closer supervision. Eleanor was flagged. She ate from a tray. The food was the color of institutional beige and tasted approximately as expected. She ate everything on every tray because she was not going to give anyone a reason to note in her file that she was refusing meals. Activities were offered twice weekly. Bingo on Tuesday afternoons in the main common room. Hymn singing on Friday mornings led by a volunteer from a church in Augusta, whose name Eleanor never learned because she attended only once long enough to establish that she could not be trusted to sit quietly in a corner. Phone calls from Garrett in the first 6 weeks, 0. Phone calls from Lorraine in the first 6 weeks, 3. The shortest lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The longest lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. In each one, Lorraine said she was busy, that things at the dental office were demanding that she would call again soon. She did not call again soon. Between the second and third calls, there were 19 days. Eleanor recorded all of it. She was not doing this out of bitterness, though she would not have pretended bitterness was entirely absent. She was doing it because she had been a record keeper her entire professional life, and because information organized and retained with precision was the only real form of power available to a 65-year-old woman in a memory care facility who was pretending not to know what day it was. Her roommate, Doris Hensley, had been at Sunrise Manor for 4 years. She was 82 years old. She had grown up in Pratt County, had married a wheat farmer named Leonard, who had been dead for 9 years, had raised 3 children, and had 12 grandchildren, whose names she could no longer consistently recall. She wore a nightgown the color of weak tea, and she sometimes cried at night, a long, thin sound that came from somewhere very far inside her, like water running in the dark beneath a field. Her son lived in Denver. He had visited once in the 2 years Eleanor was aware of for approximately 90 minutes on a Saturday. In what the nurses indicated had been the previous spring, Eleanor watched Doris, and she thought about time, about what it meant to spend 4 years in a room looking at a parking lot, about what a person became when the people who were supposed to come did not come, and the days accumulated anyway, and the nightgown wore thin, and still the hands lay loose on the chest each night, with that particular quality of waiting that had nowhere left to arrive. She thought about this, and she did not let herself feel it too directly, because she could not afford that kind of feeling right now. She filed it away. She kept counting. It was the 3rd Sunday of November, the 3rd week Eleanor had been at Sunrise Manor, when the nurse who worked the evening shift came into room 14 and set something on the bedside table. Eleanor was sitting in the chair by the window reading the Pickwick papers, which she had opened to page 47, without registering a single word for the past 20 minutes. The nurse was a woman named Beverly Oakes. She was 52 years old, originally from a small town outside Salina, and she had been working the evening shift at Sunrise Manor for 12 years. She was the only member of the staff who consistently called Eleanor Mrs. Voss, rather than sweetheart or honey or dear. She was the only one who remembered which side of the room Eleanor preferred the lamp on without being reminded. She had the hands of someone who worked hard, and the face of someone who had seen enough to have stopped being surprised by most of it, and she called things what they were, without cruelty and without softening. Mrs. Voss, Beverly said, "Someone came for you again this afternoon." Eleanor looked up from the book. "Who?" "Your son, Connor." "That is 3 Sundays in a row now. He was here at 2 o'clock. He stayed 45 minutes in the lobby. He sat in the chair by the window near the front desk, and he did not read anything, and he did not look at his phone. He just sat. And then he left this for you." Beverly set something on the nightstand beside George's wooden box. It was a Honeycrisp apple. Red, polished, washed clean, still faintly cool from the outdoor air. "He brings one every week," Beverly said. "He told me you always said you liked Honeycrisp best. He asks me every time whether you have eaten enough and whether you have warm socks. Eleanor looked at the apple. She did not remember ever telling Connor what kind of apple she preferred. She was not certain she had ever discussed apples with her youngest son in any conversation she could bring clearly to mind. And yet he had known, or he had asked someone, or he had simply remembered in the way that certain people remember small things about the people they love without being aware that they are storing the information at all. Beverly sat down on the edge of Doris's empty bed, which was something the staff was not technically supposed to do, and which Beverly did anyway when she felt like a conversation needed to be had sitting down. She said, "Mrs. Voss, I'm going to tell you something, and you can tell me to mind my own business if you want. That is completely your right." Eleanor said nothing. Beverly said, "I do not know what has passed between you and that man. I am not asking. That is yours to know. But I have worked this floor for 12 years, and I have seen a great many grown children come through these doors to visit parents in this building. And I have learned to recognize the difference between the ones who come because they have to the ones who come because they feel guilty about something, and the ones who come because there is genuinely nowhere else they would rather be on a Sunday afternoon." She paused. "Your son, Connor. He is the third kind. I've been doing this long enough to know the difference." She stood. She straightened the sheets on Doris's bed. She walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back and said, "He never asks me to wake you up. Every week I tell him you are resting. Every week he nods and leaves the apple and asks if you are comfortable. He has never once asked me to bring you to him." The door closed. Eleanor sat in the chair by the window. She looked at the apple on the nightstand. She did not eat it. She left it there through that night, and through the next day and into the following evening. And she looked at it every time she looked toward the window, which was often because the window was the only source of natural light in the room. The apple shone faintly under the parking lot lamp that came on each night at 5:30. It was the most alive thing in the room, more alive than the television mounted on the far wall that played game shows in the afternoon, more alive than the artificial flowers someone had placed in a plastic vase on the windowsill before Eleanor arrived. She did not eat it because if she ate it, she would have to acknowledge something, and she was not ready to acknowledge it yet. Every Sunday after that, she heard the truck from her window. She had learned the sound of it during the days she spent at the farmhouse after the funeral. An old F-150 diesel. A specific knock in the engine that Connor had been meaning to address for 2 years. If she sat in the chair near the window and listened at approximately 1:55 in the afternoon, she could hear it turn into the Sunrise Manor parking lot. She could track the door opening and closing. She could hear, or believed she could hear, the particular rhythm of those boot steps crossing the lobby floor. Every Sunday she told Beverly the same thing. "Tell him I am resting." Beverly would nod. She would not argue. She would leave the room and return 45 minutes later with a clean apple and set it beside the previous one, without comment. And Eleanor would look at the growing collection of apples on her nightstand and understand that she was doing something she could not entirely explain, and that it was costing her something she could not entirely afford to spend. Why did she keep sending him away? She asked herself this question many times. She sat with it in the evenings while Doris slept. She examined it from the various angles available to a woman who had spent 30 years teaching children how to think carefully. Part of the answer was fear. Fear that if she saw him, if she looked into his face, which was George's face in so many of the essential ways, she would lose the thread of what she was doing. She would forget that she was performing. She would want to sit down and tell him everything. The whole plan, the notebook, the library visit, the practice tremor, all of it. And if she told him everything, then the whole architecture of what she was building would fall apart before it had served its purpose. But there was something underneath the fear. Something she was ashamed of even as she recognized it. Even now, after everything. Even after the apple and Beverly's words and 3 weeks of empty Sundays, there was still a voice in the back of her mind that she could not entirely silence. A voice that had been there since Connor was 17 years old and had taken George's truck out on a back road at night and put it into a fence post and come home smelling of cheap beer and remorse. A voice that said he is coming because he knows something. He is coming because he thinks there is something here for him. The others were just less patient. She knew the voice was lying. She knew it in the same way she knew with perfect clarity that 2 + 2 was 4. The apple was not the behavior of a man calculating what he might gain. The apple was a Honeycrisp, because she had once in some conversation she could no longer place mentioned that she liked them. And he had remembered, and he had stopped at a store on his way here every single week without being asked. But knowing a voice is lying and making it stop are two different things. That is one of the things no one tells you about growing older. The wrong voices do not get quieter with time. You simply learn to live beside them, the way you learn to live beside a highway. After a while, you hear it, and you know what it is, and you do not have to act on it. But it does not stop. It was the 4th week when Garrett came. He arrived on a Wednesday, which was not a Sunday, which told Eleanor everything she needed to know about the nature of this visit before he walked through the door. He had a leather briefcase. He did not have flowers. He did not have an apple. He kissed her forehead, sat down across from her in the chair Beverly usually sat in, and asked how she was feeling in the voice he used when he had already decided what was going to happen next and was performing the courtesy of the preliminary question before moving to the point. Eleanor let her gaze drift toward the wall. She said, "There is a woman in the next bed. She cries sometimes at night." Do you know why she cries? Garrett did not look at Doris's bed. He opened the briefcase. "Mom," he said, "I need you to look at something. Some papers. It is just to make sure I can continue managing things while you are getting better here. The house needs some attention, and there are financial decisions that cannot wait indefinitely." Eleanor let her eyes come back to him slowly. The way her eyes came back to things now with that particular incompleteness of return that she had practiced in the mirror for 2 hours in the first week after the funeral. The document Garrett set on the tray table in front of her was not a simple authorization to handle the household expenses. It was a comprehensive power of attorney. She recognized the language. She had spent an afternoon at the Millfield Public Library 3 weeks before her admission, reading about powers of attorney, because Eleanor Voss had been a thorough woman her entire life, and she had known this moment was coming, and she had wanted to understand exactly what she would be looking at when it arrived. This document would give Garrett legal control over every financial account, every piece of real property, every asset, including the 5 acres that George had deeded to Connor in 2010, which Connor had been living on for 6 years, on which his trailer sat, beside which his shop stood, on which he was currently fixing old machines for farmers who sometimes paid him in eggs and honey, because that was all they had. This document, if signed and filed, would give Garrett the authority to sell Connor's land out from under him. Eleanor picked up the pen. She held it. She looked at the papers for what she calculated was the appropriate length of time for a woman who was reading something she did not entirely follow. Then she looked up at Garrett and said, "Honey, the shop. I want to leave the shop to the one who, to your father's, the man who fixes the..." She let her voice trail. She let her mouth stay open a moment too long. She let her hand begin to tremble against the pen. Garrett exhaled through his nose. "Mom," he said quietly with the particular patience of a man who has decided to be patient as a strategy. "Do not make this complicated. Just sign where the tabs are." She signed. She signed it the way she had signed the first one. Too large. Too loose. A signature that her bank would not have honored on a withdrawal slip. She handed the pen back to Garrett, and he smiled at her with warmth that she recognized as the outermost layer of relief. He kissed her forehead again. "I love you, Mom," he said. He left 15 minutes after he arrived. Beverly was in the hallway. Eleanor watched through the window as the Lexus pulled out of the parking lot. She heard Beverly come into the room and sit down on the edge of Doris's bed in the way that meant Beverly had something to say and intended to say it. Beverly said, "Mrs. Voss, that man came here and he brought you documents to sign. He did not bring you a warm sweater. It is getting cold." She got up. She walked out. Eleanor sat for a long time with George's watch on her wrist, listening to it tick. It was the 5th week when Lorraine came. She brought chrysanthemums from the grocery store in Augusta, the cheap variety in the plastic wrap, with the price sticker still on. She kissed Eleanor's cheek and arranged the flowers in a plastic cup of tap water. And she took 3 photographs before she had been in the room for 10 minutes. Eleanor knew this because she was watching and she counted. 3 photographs. She would learn later through Beverly, who had seen the post on her own phone without comment, and turned the screen briefly toward Eleanor, that the photographs had been posted to Lorraine's social media account within 20 minutes of Lorraine leaving the parking lot. The caption was about dementia being a thief. The caption asked everyone reading to hug their parents tonight. Several hundred people told Lorraine how strong she was. Lorraine stayed 22 minutes. On her drive back to Topeka, she made a phone call that lasted 46 minutes. Eleanor knew about the phone call because Beverly had a way of learning things the way people who work the same floor for 12 years have a way of knowing what moves through a building and what it means. The call was to a lawyer named Philip Holt in Topeka, who handled elder law cases including competency proceedings. By the end of the call, Lorraine had authorized Philip Holt to file a petition for guardianship in the state of Kansas, asking a judge to declare Eleanor legally incompetent to manage her own affairs. Eleanor did not know the details of this until later, but she knew the shape of it. She had known the shape of it from the night she heard Lorraine's phone click on in the guest room and had pressed the kitchen extension to her ear and listened. Phil had said 3 flat sentences. Lorraine, she did not recognize Tyler. "We cannot risk it. Get Holt moving." Lorraine had been quiet for a long time. Then she had said, "Phil, she is still my mother." And Phil had said she used to be. Eleanor had sat at the kitchen table in the dark of the farmhouse that night, and she had thought about Lorraine. Not about what Lorraine had done or was doing. About who Lorraine was. About the girl who had won the summer reading contest 3 years running and had brought the ribbons home to show Eleanor with a particular shy pride that she covered quickly with brightness. Because even at 8 years old, she had understood that wanting too much felt dangerous. About the woman who had married a man who answered for her in conversations and who made decisions on her behalf and called them practical, and who had trained her over 11 years to understand that her own instincts were the thing most likely to go wrong. Eleanor had not taught Lorraine how to trust herself. She had taught her children many things. She had not taught them that one. That was something Eleanor carried. She did not decide to forgive Lorraine that night. She decided to understand her, which was different and harder and more useful. It was the 6th week. November had come fully into its authority over the Kansas plains. The wind cut sideways across the parking lot, and rattled the glass in the window frame of room 14 with a persistence that Eleanor found after the first week almost companionable. A known sound, a reliable sound, something that showed up every day and did what it was going to do without apology. Doris had been crying since before dinner. It wasn't like crying about anything specific. Eleanor had learned this over the weeks they had shared the room. Doris cried the way weather moved through, not because of a reason, but because the system had built up and had to release. The sound was thin and long, and it filled the room the way water fills the lowest available space. Eleanor sat in her chair. She held the wooden box in her lap. She took out George's watch and wound it and put it back on her wrist. She thought, I cannot stay here. Not as a plan, not as a decision exactly, more as a recognition. The way you recognize after a certain amount of time standing in the rain that you are wet all the way through and more standing will not produce a different result. She was not going to die in this room. If she died, which she did not intend to do for a considerable number of years, she was going to die in the house on Hollow Creek Road that George built in 1978, in the bed he had built for her under the water stain on the ceiling he had promised to paint since 2011. She opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand, $47 in cash. She had been setting aside small amounts from the spending money the facility provided for the commissary a few dollars at a time for 5 weeks. She had not spent any of it. She stood up. She took off the facility-issued grip socks and put on her own wool socks that Beverly had brought in for her 3 weeks ago, tucked inside a grocery bag that Beverly had carried past the front desk without being asked what was in it, because Beverly Oaks was that kind of woman. She put on her own shoes. She put on George's denim jacket, the one that smelled still faintly of his particular combination of machine oil and cold air and the wintergreen mints he kept in the cup holder of the truck. Beverly had brought it to her in the same grocery bag as the socks. Eleanor had not asked how Beverly had gotten into the farmhouse. She had not needed to ask. She went to Doris's bed. Doris had stopped crying. She was asleep now, her mouth soft and open, her hand resting on her chest. Eleanor pulled the blanket up from where it had slipped below Doris's waist and tucked it carefully under her shoulders, the same way she had tucked blankets around her children in the winters of the 1980s and 1990s, the same way she had tucked blankets around hundreds of children over 30 years of classroom mornings. She bent down. She said very softly, "Goodbye, Doris." Doris did not stir. Eleanor picked up the wooden box. She picked up the $47. She walked to the door of room 14. She turned off the lamp. She looked back once at the room that had held her for 6 weeks, at the parking lot light falling yellow through the window, at the plastic cup of Lorraine's grocery store chrysanthemums on the sill, at the collection of Honeycrisp apples. Connor had left 5 of them now lined up on the nightstand. She turned. She walked down the hall in her own shoes. The side door near the staff break room was the one she had identified in the second week. It was the door the night shift used for cigarette breaks. The latch did not catch fully from 11 at night until 6 in the morning, every single night, because the door frame had settled and the mechanism no longer aligned correctly. Eleanor had watched 5 different nurses use this door over 6 weeks. Not one of them had checked whether it locked behind them. The state inspector was not scheduled to address it for another 2 months. Eleanor had calculated this from a conversation she had overheard at the nurse's station. She pushed the door open. The Kansas night met her like a wall, 24 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind coming hard and straight from the north, the kind of wind that found the gap between collar and chin and did not stop there. Eleanor stepped out onto the concrete, and the door closed behind her. She started walking. The Greyhound station was 1 3/4 miles west. She knew this because 6 weeks ago she had asked the young candy striper named Heather casually while Heather was restocking the magazine rack how far it was from Sunrise Manor to the bus station. Heather had said about 1.5 miles, Mrs. Voss, just down Main past the gas station and the hardware store. Eleanor had said thank you and had gone back to her room and had written 1.75 miles in the back of the red notebook and had not looked at it again because she did not need to. She remembered things. She kept to the edge of the road where the gravel shoulder met the dead grass. The wind did not slow. A pickup truck passed her going east, and its headlights swept across her without slowing. A county sheriff's cruiser passed her going the other direction. The deputy inside did not look toward her. She was an old woman in a denim jacket walking on the shoulder of a Kansas highway in November before dawn. In this part of the country, people minded their own business the way they minded the weather, not because they did not care, but because there was too much of both to address all of it. She passed the hardware store with its hand-painted hours in the window. She passed the feed supply with the John Deere logo, sun-faded on the sign. She passed a 24-hour gas station, whose lot was empty except for a single car at the pump and a moth-eaten string of plastic flags overhead that had been there since some long-ago promotional event and had never been taken down. She passed a man sleeping on a bench at the edge of the gas station lot. He had a blanket pulled to his chin and a paper cup on the ground beside him, and a plastic bag with what looked like everything he owned tied to the bench slat. Eleanor stopped. She stood there in the wind and she looked at him and she did not entirely know why she stopped. She took a $5 bill from the $47 in her pocket and she put it under the paper cup so the wind would not take it. He did not wake up. She walked on. She would think about him later. She thought about him still. She did not know why she stopped. Maybe it was because he was a stranger and she was about to become one. Maybe it was because somebody on this earth needed to know what cold was tonight. And it would not just be her. She did not know. She kept walking. She reached the Greyhound station at 4:40 in the morning. It was a single-room concrete block, a vending machine in the corner, a wall-mounted electric heater that ticked and rattled and produced warmth in approximate proportion to the noise it made. 4 plastic chairs bolted to the floor in a row. There was one other person waiting, a woman in her late 50s with a heavy canvas bag in her lap and the look of someone who had been traveling for a long time and expected to travel for a long time more. They did not speak. They nodded to each other across the plastic chairs. That was sufficient. 2 women in a Greyhound station before dawn in a small Kansas town. Some things were understood without being said. The first bus to Millfield departed at 6:15. The ticket cost $18.40. Eleanor bought it from the machine with the $47 she had saved, folded the ticket into the pocket of George's denim jacket, sat down in a plastic chair, and waited. At Sunrise Manor, the morning shift nurse walked into room 14 at 5:17 and found 1 empty bed, 1 wooden box gone, 1 denim jacket gone, and Doris Hensley asleep with the blanket tucked exactly to her chin. The nurse checked the bathroom. She checked the closet. She walked quickly to the nurse's station and picked up the phone. At 6 in the morning, the facility supervisor called Garrett. Garrett was in the kitchen of his townhouse in Wichita. He was wearing a pressed shirt and getting ready for a 9 o'clock meeting regarding a development deal he had been working on for 8 months. 16 units in a planned residential community east of the city. He saw the incoming call was from an area code he did not recognize. He let it ring to voicemail. He turned his phone face down on the counter and poured his coffee. At 6:10, the supervisor called Lorraine. Lorraine was asleep. She heard the voicemail alert at 6:48. She listened to the first 12 seconds. Your mother does not appear to be in her room. We have searched the facility. She put the phone on the nightstand. She thought she is probably in the common room or in the bathroom down the hall. They will find her. She pulled the blanket back up and closed her eyes. At 6:34 in the morning, the supervisor called the third number on the emergency contact list, Connor Voss. Connor had been awake since 4. He was in the shop behind his trailer with the space heater running, working on Earl Dunning's John Deere 2-cylinder that had been giving trouble since September. Buster was asleep on a pile of moving blankets under the workbench. Connor had the engine panels off and a flashlight clamped to the frame, and his hands were dark with grease up to the forearms. His phone rang on the workbench. He looked at the number. Sunrise Manor. He picked it up. He said Voss. Mr. Voss, the supervisor, said, "Your mother is not in her room. We have searched the building. We believe she may have left the premises during the night." Connor went still. He did not ask how this had happened. He did not ask who was responsible. He asked one question. He said, what was she wearing? A denim jacket. Her own shoes. She had a small wooden box with her. We believe she had some cash, perhaps $40 or $50 from her personal account. Connor looked at the clock on the wall above the workbench. 6:36. He said, "I am on my way." He hung up. He did not call Garrett. He did not call Lorraine. He turned off the space heater. He wiped his hands on a shop rag. He looked at Buster, who had opened one eye. He said, "Stay, old man." Buster thumped his tail twice against the moving blankets. Connor put on his coat and walked to the F-150. He did not drive toward Sunrise Manor. He pulled out of the gravel drive and turned west toward Millfield, toward the center of town. Because Connor Voss had asked himself the question that Garrett and Lorraine had not bothered to ask. Not where had she gone, but where would she go? And the answer was not complicated if you thought about it for more than a moment. She did not have a car. She had not driven in nearly 2 months. She had $40-odd in cash. There was a Greyhound that ran from Augusta through Millfield every morning at 6:15 and arrived in Millfield at 7:43. He looked at the clock in the truck. 6:47. 56 minutes. He pressed harder on the gas. The bus pulled into Millfield at 7:41, 2 minutes ahead of schedule, and hissed to a stop in front of what had been the old depot building on Clement Street, which was now a coffee shop called Planed Roast that opened at 6 and closed at 2 and was shut on Sundays. The bus stopped in front of the awning because buses had always stopped in front of that awning regardless of what the building behind it became. The driver opened the door. 3 people stepped down. A teenager with earbuds and a backpack, a man in a Carhartt jacket carrying a hard case, and Eleanor Voss, 65 years old, moving carefully down the bus steps with George's wooden box pressed against her chest and George's denim jacket pulled tight across her shoulders. She had not slept in more than 26 hours. The cold had settled into her bones somewhere around 5 in the morning and had not left. Her feet felt distant from the rest of her, as though they were operating on a separate and slightly slower schedule. She stepped down onto the sidewalk and looked up. There was a man standing still on the pavement 20 feet from the bus door. His hands were in the pockets of a brown Carhartt coat. His boots were the ones he had been wearing for 4 years, work-worn, risoled ones. He was not waving. He was not walking toward her. He was not calling her name. He was simply standing there in the gray November morning light, watching her with the particular quality of stillness that belonged to people who understood that some things required being waited for rather than pursued. He had been there since 7:15 with the truck engine running. and the heater on full because he had known it would be cold. Eleanor looked at him. She started walking toward him. Her feet did not move quite right, stiff from the cold, and the plastic bus seat, and the 26 hours without sleep. She walked anyway. He did not come to meet her. He let her walk. He let her choose the distance between them, and then choose to cross it step by step on her own. She reached him. She stopped. She looked at his face. She had been going to say, "Who are you?" She had been going to stay in the character she had been inhabiting for 6 weeks, the one she had built carefully, and practiced and performed with the discipline of a woman who had spent 30 years in front of an audience. She had a whole performance still available to her. She could have deployed it without thinking, but she was cold in a way she had not been cold since she was a child. And she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep deprivation. And she had been pretending for 42 days, and she could not do it for one more second. Not one knot in front of this face that was so much like the face she had buried 6 weeks ago. She said, "I am cold." That was all she had left. Connor did not speak. He took his hands out of his pockets and he took off his coat and he put it around her shoulders over George's denim jacket, and the weight of it was immediate and warm and completely without condition. He reached out and took the wooden box gently from her arms. He put his other hand under her elbow and he walked her toward the truck. The truck cab was warm. The heater had been running for 25 minutes. The seat was cold, but the air was not. She climbed up with his hand at her elbow, and he buckled the seatbelt across her. And it took 2 tries because the latch was old and stiff. And on the first try, it did not catch, and he did not say anything about that either. He just tried it again, and on the second try, it clicked solid. He shut the door. He walked around to the driver's side. He got in. He did not start talking. He did not ask her what had happened, or how she had managed it, or what she intended next. He sat with her for a full minute in the warm cab, while she let the feeling come back into her feet and her hands, and the cold began to release its grip on the places between her shoulder blades. Then he said, "Mom, my trailer is not much, but it has a furnace and it has coffee." She did not answer. He put the truck in gear. The cab smelled like diesel, and the particular old leather smell of a work seat that had absorbed 20 years of use and like something else. Something that took her a moment to identify because she had not encountered it in many months. Wintergreen. She looked at the cup holder. There was a roll of wintergreen mints sitting beside a folded shop rag. The same kind George had kept in every vehicle he had ever owned in the same location. In every vehicle because George Voss had been a man of specific habits that did not change. Eleanor closed her eyes. She felt the truck moving under her the familiar Kansas road, the sound of the tires on pavement, the occasional tick of a pebble in the wheel well. She felt the heater working steadily at the cold that had been inside her since 3 in the morning. She felt the weight of Connor's coat across her shoulders. She thought, "I should keep the performance going. I'm not finished yet. There is still work to do, and I should not let him see that I am anything other than what I have been presenting myself to be." She tried. She let her voice come out soft and slightly lost. She said, "Where are you taking me?" Connor did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the road, both hands on the wheel at the positions George had always kept his hands 10 and 2 steady. He said to my house, "Mom, I am your son. We are going home." She watched him from the corner of her eye. His hands on the wheel were large and scarred in the way that Hands get scarred from working with machines and tools and rough edges. Across the back of his right hand was a long, thin, white line she recognized from 30 years ago. A wound from a lawnmower blade when he was 17 years old. A wound that had required 11 stitches at the emergency room in Augusta at 2 in the morning. While she had stayed home with Lorraine, who had a fever while George had driven Connor to the hospital, and sat with him in the waiting room until 4:30. While she had been so angry at a 17-year-old boy for drinking and mowing in the dark, had been angry in a way she had let compound for months after, in a way she had never entirely let go. She looked at that scar. She looked at his face, at the jaw that was George's jaw, at the set of the eyes that was George's, set at the silence that was George's silence. And she understood something that she had been avoiding understanding for a very long time. She had spent 30 years calling what was in front of her a disappointment. She had been looking at George's second self, the quieter version. The one who showed up in the rain and fixed the gate and brought the apple and drove toward Millfield instead of toward Sunrise Manor, because he had simply thought about where she would go, and she had spent 30 years calling him the wrong name for what he was. She closed her eyes again. The road moved under them. She felt very slowly in the warmth of the truck cab, the cold beginning at last to leave her bones. Connor's trailer sat 50 yards behind the shop at the end of a gravel drive that curved up a slight rise from the county road. It was a single wide white with pale green trim that had faded over the years to something closer to the color of old sage. There was a wooden porch he had built himself 4 steps up a propane tank on the south side, and a small fenced yard where the grass had gone brown and flat in the November cold. Eleanor looked at it through the truck window and thought, this is where he has been living. This is where my son has been all this time. 12 miles from my kitchen table. He helped her down from the truck. He held the wooden box while she found her footing on the gravel, and then he handed it back to her and opened the trailer door and said, "Come on in, Mom. The kettle is on." The inside was 600 square feet, maybe a little less. A living room and kitchen sharing the same space, one bedroom behind a hollow core door, a bathroom at the end of the hall. The floor was old laminate in a wood grain pattern worn smooth near the door where boots had tracked in years of weather. There were 2 scuff marks on the baseboard by the entrance that she recognized as the kind left by the steel toe of a work boot. The mark of a man who came in tired and let the door swing. The couch was brown from the 90s with a flannel blanket folded in thirds across the back of it. The folding was precise. The blanket was clean. There was a small electric stove, a coffee maker that was newer than everything else in the room, and a kitchen table with 2 chairs. On the table there was a wooden coaster. On the coaster there was a coffee mug turned upside down, waiting. And then there was the bookshelf. Eleanor had not expected a bookshelf. She walked toward it without consciously deciding to the way you walk toward something that requires recalibration of everything you thought you knew. The books were arranged not by any system she could immediately identify, but in a way that suggested they had been read and returned and read again. Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, The Crossing, a repair manual for John Deere 2-cylinder engines, its spine cracked from use, a diesel injection systems handbook, a King James Bible, the cover separating at the hinge, a ribbon bookmark somewhere in the middle, a copy of East of Eden paperback, the pages curled at the corners the way pages curl when they have been read in bed. And at the end of the row, a paperback copy of Plainsong by Kent Harroff, the cover soft, the spine rolled. Eleanor stood in front of that shelf for a long moment. Her son had been reading Kent Harroff in a trailer 12 miles from her kitchen, and she had not known. She had not asked. She had not thought to ask because she had not believed there was anything to ask about. Connor came in behind her. He set the wooden box on the table. He said, "The bedroom is yours, Mom." "I changed the sheets." He paused. "I changed them 3 weeks ago. They have been waiting." Eleanor turned and looked at him. She said, "They have been waiting." He shrugged. He did not meet her eyes. He said, "I did not know when, but I thought maybe. One day." She walked to the bedroom door. He had opened it when they came in. The bed was made with clean sheets and a patchwork quilt in blues and greens, the kind sold at church sales, well worn and substantial. A glass of water sat on the nightstand, already poured. The lamp on the nightstand was turned to its lowest setting. The room smelled like soap and like air, like a room where a window had been opened recently and then closed. He had made this room ready 3 weeks ago and had not told anyone. Eleanor sat down on the edge of the bed. She looked at him standing in the doorway with his hands at his sides. She opened her mouth. She wanted to say something that would carry the weight of what she was feeling. And she was a woman who had spent 30 years helping children find words for things. And she could not find a single one that was adequate. What came out of her mouth was, "Where's Buster?" Connor said, "He is in the shop. I will bring him over once you are settled. He will be glad to see you." He started to close the door. He stopped. He said, "I will be on the couch. If you need anything, just call. I will hear you." He closed the door. Eleanor lay down. She pulled the quilt to her chin. The sheets smelled exactly like what he had said. Soap and aired linen, the smell of someone who had prepared a space for a person they hoped would come. She closed her eyes. She slept for 11 hours without waking. She could not remember the last time she had slept without waking. She had not slept through a night since the October evening before George's funeral. And that sleep had been the sleep of a woman who had spent 3 days crying alone in the dark and had finally run out. She woke at 7 in the morning. The trailer was warm. She could smell coffee and something else. Something with bacon. The particular smell of a cast iron pan that has been seasoned over years of use. She lay in the bed and listened. The trailer was quiet. Connor had already gone out to the shop. He went out at 5 the way George had always gone out at 5, because that was when the work began, and there was always work, and the work did not wait for the convenience of a reasonable hour. On the kitchen table there was a plate covered in aluminum foil, 2 slices of bacon, 1 fried egg, a piece of toast. The coffee mug from the night before was filled and sitting on a small electric warming pad glowing red. Beside the plate was a folded piece of paper block letters in pencil. Mom, eat. Back at noon. My number is 316-555-0184 if you need anything. Buster is in the house with you. Connor. She stood at the table and held the note and looked at the handwriting. Block letters. Forward slant. The way the T was crossed with a short downward stroke. It was George's handwriting. Not similar to George's handwriting. It was George's handwriting, the same as every note George had ever left her in 42 years, the same as the handwriting on the yellow envelope in the safe she had not yet opened. Eleanor sat down at the table. She thought about the 6 weeks at Sunrise Manor. She thought about the tally in the back of the red notebook. Garrett, 0 notes. Lorraine, 0 notes. 0 from anyone. And here in a 600-square-foot trailer on a county road outside Millfield, Kansas, a note written in pencil before the sun came up by a man who did not know if she would ever say thank you. She ate the bacon. She ate the egg. She drank the coffee. It was too strong the way George had always made it, the way she had complained about for 40 years, and this morning it was exactly right. Connor came back at noon. He came in with grease on his hands and went straight to the sink and washed to his elbows with dish soap the way George had washed Thorough twice through. He dried on a clean towel hanging on the oven handle where George had always hung a clean towel. He reached into the paper bag he had set on the counter. He said, "I got some groceries. I did not know what you wanted, so I got basics. Milk, bread, oranges, a couple of cans of soup." He reached into the bag again. He pulled out a book hardcover library sticker on the spine. He set it on the table beside her coffee mug. He said the librarian picked it out. "I went in and told her I needed something for you. Told her you like long books with secrets in them. She said this one, Where the Crawdads Sing." The library sticker said it had been checked out 21 times. The spine was well broken. Someone had left a gum wrapper as a bookmark 70 pages in, and the librarian had not removed it. Eleanor picked up the book. She looked at it. She thought about Connor walking into the Millfield Public Library, which was a place he had been escorted out of at 14 years old, and asking a librarian he did not know to choose a book for his mother. She thought about him driving home with it, setting it on the table beside the coffee mug, without ceremony, without waiting for a response. She said, "Thank you, Connor." He looked up from drying his hands. He nodded once. He said, "Welcome, Mom." That was all. He did not push it further. He did not need anything back from it. It was the fourth day when the notebook fell out of his coat pocket. He had hung the coat on the hook by the door when he came in for lunch, and a small spiral notebook had slipped from the breast pocket and skidded across the laminate floor and come to rest near the baseboard by the kitchen table. Connor did not see it. He was already at the sink. Eleanor watched it happen, and she looked at the notebook on the floor, and she made a decision she was not proud of, and she picked it up. She should have put it back. She knew that. She told herself to put it on the hook, and instead, she opened it. The first page was dated November of 2017, Aces Trust Bank. The writing below listed a total gambling debts and overdue credit cards, $18,400. Below that, goal payoff in 7 years. Then a column of dates and payments. December 2017, $200. January 2018, $250. February 2018, $200. Each month for 6 years, the same careful record in the same block lettering. Some months, $200. Some months, $300. When a job had paid more than expected. Never missing a month. Never a gap in the record. She turned the pages slowly. September 2023. $1,200. Almost there, he had written in the margin. Underlined once. The last entry was dated October 5th, 2023. Paid in full. And below that in smaller letters, Dad will never know I did this. That is okay. October 5th, 2023. 4 days before George died in the shop with a wrench in his hand, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with the notebook, and her hand was shaking. And it was not the practiced tremor she had spent 2 hours perfecting in front of her bathroom mirror. It was the real kind. The kind that comes when something you have been carrying for 30 years shifts position all at once. She thought about Thanksgiving 2017. She thought about the words she had said in front of everyone at that table. She thought about Connor setting down his fork, walking out without his coat into the November night. And she thought about what he had done 2 weeks later, walked into a bank and signed a repayment plan for $18,400 on a tractor mechanic's wages. She had called him the biggest disappointment of her life. and he had gone home and decided to fix the only thing he could fix by himself, without telling anyone, and he had done it in 6 years. She put the notebook back in his coat pocket exactly as she had found it, spine down, same angle. She smoothed the pocket closed. She sat back down at the table. She did not tell him she had seen it, not that day. It was the 14th day when she broke. Connor had been at a farm 20 miles north of town, working on an irrigation pump that needed to be winterized before the hard freeze came. He got home after 7 hands stiff from the cold, the particular careful way he moved when his joints had been in cold air for too many hours. Eleanor had made beef stew, the same recipe she had been making since 1975. The same one she had made for Garrett and Lorraine the night before they took her to Sunrise Manor. It was the first time she had cooked for Connor in 12 years. She had been afraid to. She had stood at the stove and thought, what if he does not eat it? What if he refuses it? What if offering him something gives him the opportunity to decline it? And she had made it anyway because she was 65 years old, and she was tired of being afraid of her own children. Connor washed his hands. He sat down. He picked up his spoon and took a bite, and he said, "Mom, this is good." She nodded. He took another bite. He reached for his glass of water. His hand caught the edge of the small ceramic butter dish on the table, the one he had bought at an estate sale, chipped on one side, pale yellow with a rooster painted on the lid. The dish went over the edge of the table. It hit the laminate floor and broke into 3 pieces, and the soft butter inside spread in a small arc across the floor. Before her mind could intervene, before the woman she had spent the past 6 weeks working to become could say anything at all, the old voice came out. The voice that had been speaking to Connor Voss since he was 16 years old. The voice that had said those words at Thanksgiving 2017. The voice she had believed she was done with. She said, "You cannot do anything right, can you?" The kitchen went completely still. Connor did not move. He held his spoon halfway between the bowl and his mouth. He set it down. He set it down very carefully on the edge of the bowl. He picked up his napkin. He folded it in half and then in half again. He placed it on the table beside his bowl. He bent down from his chair and began picking up the pieces of the butter dish from the floor one at a time. His back was to her. His voice, when it came, was quiet. It did not shake. It did not rise. It was the voice of a man who had heard this particular sentence enough times that it had worn a groove in him, the way water wears a groove in stone. And he no longer needed to react to it, because it had become part of the landscape. He said, "Yeah, Mom, I know. You have been telling me that for 30 years. He stood. He walked to the trash can and dropped the 3 pieces of ceramic into it. He came back and picked up his napkin and wiped the butter from the floor and threw the napkin away. He went to the closet and took his coat off the hook and put it on. He picked up his keys from the table by the door. He said, "I am going out to the shop. Eat your supper. Leave the dishes. I will do them when I get back." He opened the door and went outside, and the door closed behind him without slamming, which was somehow worse than if it had slammed. Eleanor sat at the table. The 2 bowls of stew were still steaming. His was untouched. She looked at the place where the butter dish had been. She looked at her own hands on the table. She had done it. She had done it again. After everything, after 6 weeks in a memory care facility watching her son leave apples, she could not eat after 11 days in his trailer with clean sheets and pencil notes and a library book chosen by a stranger. After the notebook and the 6 years of payments made alone in silence, she had opened her mouth and put 30 years of damage back on the table between them. in 4 words. Same woman, same voice, same damage applied to the same person who had never done anything in his adult life except try to fix the things he had broken. She leaned down and picked up the piece of the butter dish that had slid under the table. A small triangle white glaze on one side, raw ceramic on the break. She held it. The edge caught the pad of her thumb. A thin line of red welled up. She watched it. She started to cry. She had not cried since the night of the funeral. 6 weeks and 11 days. She had been too busy and too controlled and too much inside the performance to cry. But one broken dish had done what 6 weeks of institutional bleach smell and parking lot views had not done. She cried at the kitchen table of her son's trailer while the beef stew cooled in the bowls, and the blood from her thumb made a small dark mark on the laminate floor. Buster came from the corner where he had been asleep on an old dog bed. He put his chin on her knee. He looked up at her with cloudy eyes that held no judgment, and no prescription, only presence. She put her hand on his head. After a while, she stopped. She stood up. She cleaned the floor. She ran her thumb under the tap and found a box of bandages in the drawer beside the sink. A whole drawer full of them. The kind of drawer a man who works with his hands keeps stocked as a matter of course. She put a bandage on her thumb. She put on George's denim jacket. She walked outside. The shop light was on, a square of yellow in the November dark, the most solid and reliable thing in the field. She crossed the gravel. She opened the shop door. Connor was sitting on a wooden stool at the workbench. He was not working on anything. His hands were in his lap. He was holding a photograph, small, black and white, slightly bent at one corner. She could see it from across the shop. 2 people standing beside an engine block, both of them with grease-dark faces. One of them young. One of them not young, the older one with his hand on the younger one's shoulder. A photograph from 1995. Connor had been 17. George had been 50. They had just finished rebuilding an engine for a Massey Ferguson that Earl Dunning's father had owned. George had his hand on Connor's shoulder, and both of them were grinning at something beyond the frame. Connor was not looking at the photograph. He was looking at the wall above the workbench. Eleanor said, "Connor." He did not turn around. He said, "Go back inside, Mom. It is cold." She said, "Connor, I am sorry." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do not be sorry, Mom. You were not lying. I cannot do anything right. I never could." She walked into the shop. The cold inside was different from the cold outside, heavier smelling of old grease and steel, and a trace of cigar smoke in the wood from the years when George had smoked in here on winter afternoons. She walked toward him. She stopped 4 feet behind him. She said, "That is not true." He did not answer. She said it again. "That is not true, Connor." He set the photograph face down on the workbench. He turned around on the stool. He looked at her. In the light of the single overhead bulb, his eyes were wet. He was not crying, but his eyes were wet in the way eyes get wet when something has been held in them for a very long time. He said, "Mom, I did not go to college. I was a drunk for 12 years. I have been divorced. I live in a trailer. I fix old men's machines for whatever they can pay, which is sometimes nothing. When Dad died, I had nothing to give you. Garrett has a Lexus. Lorraine has a house in Topeka. I have a trailer and a dog and a set of wrenches." Eleanor took one more step toward him. She said, "You paid off $18,400 in 6 years, by yourself, on a mechanic's wages." His face changed. He said, "How do you know that?" She told him about the notebook, about the day it fell from his coat pocket, about reading it and putting it back and not telling him. She said I should not have read it, but I did. And I am telling you now because you need to know that I know. He did not speak for a moment. She said your father knew too. He knew everything. I'm going to show you something tomorrow. There is a letter. There are papers. I have not opened the letter yet. I was waiting until I had the words. But I think it is time, Connor. Your father left something for us in the shop, in a place he told you about in 2017. Connor's hand went to his neck, to the chain he wore under his shirt. A thin silver chain. He pulled it out. At the end of it was a small brass key worn from years of being held and turned and worried over. He said, "How did you know about the key?" Eleanor sat down on the wooden chair in the corner. The same chair she had sat in the first afternoon she had watched him work on Earl Dunning's tractor. She said, "Because the first night I was in your trailer, I sorted your father's wrenches on the kitchen table. By size, by type, by order of use, the way he taught both of us when you were 6 years old, and I was learning alongside you. You watched me do it. You said nothing. But your face changed. That was when I knew you knew I was not sick." Connor looked at her for a long time. He said, "You knew that I knew." She said, "I knew." He said, "When did you figure it out? About the key, about the safe?" She said, "George did not give that key to Garrett. He did not give it to Lorraine. He gave it to the one of us who would know what it meant and what to do with it. I have known your father for 42 years, Connor. I knew where he would put the thing that mattered most." Connor pulled the chain over his head. He held the key in his open palm. The brass was warm from being worn against his skin. He said he gave it to me the night he told me to go. November 2017. He said, "Connor, if anything happens to me, you take this to your mother. Not to Garrett. Not to Lorraine. To your mother. You give her the key and you bring her to the shop." He paused. I thought it was a condition. Like if I proved myself the key was my way back in. He never said come back. He died. And I thought he had died still angry. He held the key out to her. He said, "I never opened it, Mom. Not once. Not in 6 years. He gave it to me and I wore it. And I never looked." Eleanor took the key from his hand. It was warm. She closed her fingers around it. She said he was not still angry. "I promise you I cannot prove it until tomorrow. But I will by morning." He nodded. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He made a short sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close to it the sound of a man releasing something that has been held too long. He said, "Mom, you knew I knew you were pretending. The whole time in the truck in the trailer. You knew and you kept going." She said, "I knew." He said, "How? How did you know I knew?" She said, "Because your father looked at people the way you look at people. He saw everything and said nothing and waited. It is the same face. You sorted his wrenches the way he taught you when you were 6 years old. A person who is truly losing their mind does not do that." She paused. "And when I said I was cold at the bus station," that sentence was too grammatically complete for a woman in early cognitive decline. He almost smiled. He said, "I knew the moment you said it. Nobody who is genuinely lost says I am cold with that kind of clarity. I knew in the truck inside the first 10 minutes. She said, and you said nothing. He said it was not my place to say anything. You needed to do what you needed to do. I just needed to make sure you were safe while you did it. They walked back to the trailer together in the dark. Buster met them at the door with a slow tail wag, his whole back end moving with the effort of it. Connor made fresh coffee. They sat at the kitchen table where the butter dish had broken 2 hours before. The pieces were in the trash. The floor was clean. The smear of butter was gone. The small dark mark from Eleanor's blood was gone. She had not seen him clean it. He had not seen her clean it. It was simply gone the way certain things get handled between people who have decided without announcing the decision to move forward. She said, "What do we do now?" He said, "Tomorrow morning we go to the shop. We open the safe. And then you decide what to do about Garrett and Lorraine. Because they have been busy, Mom. Lorraine filed something with a lawyer in Topeka. Garrett has the house listed with a broker. The asking price is $235. She said, "How do you know all of that?" He said, "Ruth Calloway called me. She has been tracking it. She has been George's lawyer since 1979. She is your lawyer too, if you want her to be." Eleanor looked at him. She said, "I have had Ruth Calloway as my lawyer since the morning after George's funeral. She has been tracking it for me as well. I asked her to wait until I was ready." Connor put his head down on the table. He laughed quietly into the crook of his arm, the particular laugh of a man who has just discovered he is not as alone in something as he believed. He lifted his head. He looked at her. He said, "Mom, we are going to be a real problem for those two." She said, "Yes, Connor, we are." In the morning, the air was clear and cold, and the sky over the Kansas plains was the specific shade of blue that only appears in late November, a blue so clean it looks polished. Connor led Eleanor into the shop before 7, past the 4 tractors in various states of repair, past the workbench with its organized rows of tools, past the oil drum in the corner and the shelving unit along the east wall with its bins of hardware, sorted by size and type, sorted exactly the way George had sorted them, the way he had taught Connor to sort them when Connor was 6 years old. At the southeast corner of the shop floor, Connor pulled aside a heavy rubber anti-fatigue mat, 4 feet by 4 feet, the kind mechanics stand on during long jobs to spare their knees and lower backs. Beneath it was a concrete floor that looked exactly like the rest of the concrete floor, except that if you looked very carefully, and if you knew what you were looking for, you could see a faint square seam painted over, in the same gray as the surrounding floor. Almost invisible, the work of a patient and meticulous man. Connor took a heavy industrial magnet off the bottom shelf of the workbench and placed it at the center of the square. He pulled upward. A metal plate lifted free. It had a thin skim of concrete-colored coating on its upper surface, enough to deceive a casual glance. Beneath the plate was a recessed space roughly 18 inches deep, and inside the space was a fireproof safe steel 40 centimeters square with a combination dial and a keyhole. Connor stepped back. Eleanor knelt on the cold concrete. She took the brass key from around her own neck where she had been wearing it since the previous night. She put it in the keyhole. She turned it. There was a solid click of tumblers releasing. She lifted the lid. Inside the safe were 4 items. The first was a thick folder of papers. The cover sheet bore the heading Stafford County Register of Deeds, and below that, in George's handwriting, quitclaim deeds and water rights certificates, 2009 through 2022. Eleanor opened it. She read slowly. From 2009 to 2022, George had purchased 9 parcels of farmland in the western portion of Stafford County. Not large parcels. None of them would have drawn attention individually. 3 acres here, 12 acres there. A 40-acre parcel in 2014 when a family had been forced to sell quickly after a bad harvest. a 22-acre strip in 2019 that had been part of an estate division. In total, 340 acres accumulated slowly over 14 years, one quiet purchase at a time, each one attached to something called senior irrigation water rights, with priority dates that predated the modern restrictions on the aquifer that lay beneath the western Kansas plains. Eleanor was a schoolteacher, not a water lawyer, but she had spent 3 weeks before George's funeral reading everything Ruth Calloway had suggested she read, and she understood what senior priority rights meant in the third year of a regional drought. They meant that when the water table dropped and the junior rights holders were told to wait, the senior rights holders were watered first. In a drought of this severity in this region at this moment, those rights were worth considerably more than the land they were attached to. The second item was a hand-drawn map of all 9 parcels annotated in George's handwriting. Notes on each one. Parcels 3 and 7 wells producing well good output. Parcel 5 new pump needed by spring. Parcel 9 fence line to address before cattle. The third item was a stack of old bank statements going back to 2009 paperclipped together. Every transfer George had made from the household account into a separate account he had labeled H. Voss Farm Holdings. The transfers were small and irregular, designed not to be noticed. $300 one month, $500 another. A quiet, patient accumulation over 14 years that added up to enough to buy 9 parcels of cheap, drought-stricken land and attach to each one the most valuable water rights available in Stafford County. George Voss had not burned through the money. He had buried it the only way he knew how. Underneath something underneath ordinary life and ordinary months and ordinary deposits, the way he had always hidden the things that mattered most underneath something boring. The fourth item was a brown envelope. On the front, in George's block letters for Ellie. "Open when you are ready." Eleanor picked up the envelope. Her hands were steady. Connor was kneeling beside her. She said, "I need to read this alone. Tonight after supper." She looked at him. "Whatever it says, it does not change today. I need you to know that." He nodded. She put the envelope in the inside pocket of George's denim jacket close to her chest. They closed the safe, locked it, set the plate back, set the mat back over it. The floor looked exactly as it had before. They walked back to the trailer, and Connor made eggs, and they ate without talking very much, which was how both of them preferred to eat when there was something large sitting in the room with them. She read the letter that night. Connor was asleep on the couch. Buster was on the floor between the couch and the kitchen table. The propane heater had clicked itself down to its overnight setting, and the trailer was warm and quiet. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table under the small light and opened the brown envelope. 2 pages. Block letters. The same forward slant. The same short crossing of the T. "Ellie," the letter began, "I am writing this in June of 2023. Warren tells me my heart will not make it through another summer. I do not know when you will read this, maybe soon, maybe not for a long time. But I have to write it down because I cannot say it out loud, and I have never been able to say the things that matter most out loud. And I know that about myself, and I am sorry for it. I was wrong about Connor. In November of 2017, he came to the shop one night. He had been drinking. He was crying. He said, 'Dad, I was wrong.' He asked me to forgive him. I had been angry at him for 4 years, Ellie. Angry because of the things he had done that hurt you. Because of the ways he had made you cry. I thought if I forgave him, he would do it again, and you would cry again. And I could not watch that anymore. So I told him no. I told him to leave and not come back until he could stand on his own 2 feet. I told him that without telling him, I loved him. And then I watched him from the shop window as he walked back to his truck and drove away. I was a coward, Ellie. I thought I was protecting you. I was protecting myself from having to say the words. 2 weeks after that night, he walked into Ace's Trust Bank in Millfield and signed a repayment plan for $18,400. I know because Darrell Pruitt at the bank told me just that it happened, not the amount, and I found the rest on my own. I watched that bank account for 6 years. Every month he paid. Every month, Ellie, for 72 months, he paid what he owed without telling anyone, because he did not believe anyone would care to know. I watched him stop drinking. I watched him take over Earl Dunning's account when Earl's back got too bad for him to drive out to the farm. I watched him take Buster when my heart got too bad for me to keep the dog in the cold, with me in the shop the way I used to. I thought about calling him every week for 6 years. In December of 2022, I did call. He called back 2 hours later, and I did not answer because I did not know what to say. And I thought there would be more time. There was not more time. This is my fault, Ellie. Not his, mine. I pushed him away in 2017, and I never pulled him back because I did not know how. And that is a thing I will carry to wherever it is I am going. If you are reading this, it means you went into the shop. It means Connor brought you there or brought you to where you could go, there yourself. It means that after I was gone, our youngest son was the one who stayed close enough to matter. The papers in this safe are not for you to become wealthy. You have never needed wealth. The papers are for you to do the thing I did not have the courage to do while I was alive. Give Connor the larger share. Not because he has the least. Because he is the only one of our children I pushed away, and the only one who came back without being called back. That is worth more than anything else I know how to measure. You do what you think is right. I am behind you, Ellie. Same as always. I love all three of them. But I love Connor in the way a father loves a son he hurt and did not know how to fix. I hope he knows that someday. Maybe you can tell him for me, since I cannot tell him myself. All my love, George. P.S. Buster likes peanut butter. Not too much. He gets fat. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she finished reading. She looked at the letter, and then she folded it carefully along its original lines and put it back in the envelope. She listened to Connor breathing on the couch. She listened to Buster dreaming, his legs twitching slightly, chasing something in the uncomplicated country of a dog's sleep. She was angry at George for a while, for the 6 years of watching from a distance, for the phone call he had not answered, for all the conversations that had not happened because two stubborn people had each believed the other one needed to make the next move. And then she was not angry. She just loved him the way you love a man who tried his whole life and did not get the last part right. The way you love 42 years of mornings. The way you love a creak on the third step and a water stain on the ceiling, and a too-strong cup of coffee on a heating pad, waiting on a kitchen table at noon. In the morning, she told Connor what the letter said. She read it to him out loud at the kitchen table while he held his coffee mug in both hands and looked at the surface of the coffee. When she finished, there was a long quiet. Then he said, "Mom." I knew he called. She looked at him. He said December 2022. I saw the missed call from the shop number. I called back 2 hours later. He did not answer. I figured he had called by accident. An old man with a cell phone, a pocket dial. I did not try again because I thought he was still angry. I thought if he wanted to talk, he would call back. He said I was at Earl's that day. under the combine greasy. Phone was on the workbench 10 feet away. By the time I finished and cleaned up, it was nearly dark. I called the shop number. It rang until the voicemail picked up. I thought maybe tomorrow. He set the coffee mug down. He said there was not a tomorrow. He did not cry. He sat at the table the way George would have sat at a table with something hard to hold quietly, with both hands around the mug, looking at the middle distance where the problem was too large to look at directly. Eleanor said nothing. She just sat with him. That was enough. It was what he needed, and it was what she had. And for the first time in a very long time, what she had was exactly sufficient. That afternoon, they drove into Millfield together and parked in front of Ruth Calloway's office on Main Street. Ruth was 60 years old and had been practicing law at this same address for 31 years. She wore reading glasses on a chain and had a framed Wheat Festival poster from 1987 above her filing cabinet, and she called George by his first name, the way people call someone by their first name when they have known them long enough that formality would be a kind of lie. Eleanor placed the brown envelope on the desk. She placed the deed folder beside it. She said, "I am ready, Ruth." Ruth read the letter first, twice, without speaking. Then she read the deed folder, slowly making notes on a yellow pad in a shorthand that Eleanor could not follow. After 30 minutes, she took off her glasses. She said, "Ellie, I want to be plain with you. Senior irrigation rights of this priority level attached to 340 acres during a drought of this severity and this duration. I can name 3 interested parties right now, without making a single phone call. My best estimate of value is between $2.5 and $3 million, possibly higher if we are patient with the right buyer." She tapped her pen on the pad. She said, "Are you certain about how you want to proceed?" Eleanor said she was certain. She told Ruth what she wanted. First, the power of attorney Garrett had obtained in October was to be revoked immediately. She had signed it under duress, with a signature that did not match any of the 23 samples in the folder she had brought with her, none of which bore any resemblance to the looping unfinished marks she had made on Garrett's kitchen table paperwork. Second, the guardianship petition Lorraine had filed through Philip Holt in Topeka was to be challenged and dismissed. Dr. Warren Aldrich would provide a sworn affidavit confirming that no clinical diagnosis of cognitive decline had ever been made, that the letter on his letterhead was a preliminary observation note and not a medical finding, and that Eleanor Voss was of sound mind and full legal capacity. Third, a new will. Ruth wrote down the terms as Eleanor stated them. The grandchildren first. Garrett's son Tyler and his daughter Madison, and Lorraine's son Ethan. Each one $200,000 held in trust and administered by the Millfield Community Foundation until each child turned 25, dispersible only for tuition, vocational training, or a first home purchase. Their parents would have no access to the principal or the conditions. $600,000 to the George Voss Memorial Scholarship Fund, administered by the Millfield Community Foundation for the children of Stafford County farm families. Renewable, need-based. The kind of thing George would have been embarrassed to have his name on and would have approved of entirely. Garrett received the farmhouse on Hollow Creek Road. Free and clear title transferred upon Eleanor's death. He could sell it or keep it, or do whatever he chose with it. After taxes and any deferred maintenance, it would net him approximately $200,000. That was his inheritance. Nothing further from the land or the water rights. Lorraine received $100,000 in cash held in her name, only with legal language preventing commingling with marital assets. Phil would have no access to it. Connor received the shop and the 5 acres it sat on. He received the 340 acres in Stafford County. He received the water rights. He received the H. Voss Farm Holdings account and whatever the water rights ultimately sold for after the trusts and the scholarship and Lorraine's 100,000 were funded. He became the manager and primary heir of the Voss estate. Ruth stopped writing. She looked up. She said, "Ellie, are you absolutely certain?" Eleanor said yes. Ruth looked at Connor. She said, "Mr. Voss, has your mother discussed this with you before today?" Connor said no. Ruth said, "Do you want to know what she has just asked me to document?" Connor said, "I heard it from here, ma'am. Same as you." Ruth said, "Your reaction." Connor said, "Ma'am, my mother is making a decision. It is not my place to react to it. If she asks me what I want, I will tell her. Until then, I will sit here and listen." Ruth looked at Eleanor for a long moment. She said, "He sounds like George." Eleanor said, "He always did. I just did not let myself hear it for a very long time. It took 3 weeks to prepare all the documents, the revocation of the October power of attorney, the challenge to the guardianship petition, the new will witnessed and filed. Ruth sent certified letters to Garrett and Lorraine requesting their presence at the Voss farmhouse on the 28th of March at 2 in the afternoon. Eleanor had moved back to the farmhouse by then. Connor had helped her move in the second week, staying for 2 weeks while they got the furnace running properly, after months of minimal use, then returning to his trailer, because they had both understood without discussing it that she needed to be in her own house when Garrett and Lorraine arrived. Not in Connor's trailer, not in Sunrise Manor, in the house George built. Connor was in the shop when the cars arrived. He had told her the day before, "This is between you and them, Mom. I will be in the shop. If you need me, you know where I am." She had said, "Stay in the shop." He had nodded and walked out, and that had been the end of that conversation. Garrett's Lexus pulled into the driveway at 2:03. Lorraine was in the passenger seat. She had taken the train from Topeka to Wichita the night before and ridden down with Garrett. They came up the porch steps together, and Lorraine reached for a hug at the door, and Eleanor stepped back and said, "Come inside, please. Sit down. There are things to discuss." She walked them into the living room. She had set out 3 items on the coffee table beside the coffee that she had made for herself and had not poured for anyone else. The brown envelope with George's letter, the deed folder, and a small voice recorder that Ruth had given her in case anything said in this room needed to be remembered accurately later. The recorder was running. She did not mention it. Garrett sat with his briefcase on his knee. He had a folder of his own visible at the top of it. He had come prepared to negotiate. He believed he was sitting in the stronger position. He was about to learn otherwise. Eleanor sat across from them and looked at her 2 oldest children for a long moment before she spoke. She said, "I'm not going to waste your time or mine. I'm going to be plain with you both the way this family has not been plain with each other for a very long time." She looked at Garrett first. She said, "I do not have dementia. I have never had dementia. I have been pretending since 2 weeks after your father's funeral. I started pretending the day after I stood in the hallway of this house and heard the 2 of you in the kitchen deciding what to do with me. I heard every word. I heard you say Connor does not get a share. I heard you say to sell this house. I heard you discuss Sunrise Manor before you had even confirmed that anything was wrong with me." Lorraine took her sunglasses off. Her mouth opened. Eleanor continued. She said, "The power of attorney you obtained in October is void, Garrett. My lawyer filed the revocation 3 weeks ago. The signature on those documents does not match my signature on a single piece of paper. I have signed in the past 50 years. I signed it deliberately wrong. I have 23 samples of my actual signature in a folder with Ruth Calloway. and I invite you to compare them." She looked at Lorraine. She said, "Lorraine, your lawyer in Topeka, Philip Holt. Ruth spoke with him last week. He has withdrawn the guardianship petition without your authorization because Warren Aldrich sent him a sworn affidavit stating that no diagnosis of cognitive decline was ever made, that the letter you have from him is a preliminary observation and not a clinical finding, and that I am of sound mind and entirely capable of managing my own affairs." Lorraine pressed her fingers over her mouth. Eleanor picked up the deed folder. She said, "Your father did not burn through our money. He invested it. From 2009 to 2022, he purchased 340 acres of farmland in Stafford County with senior irrigation water rights attached. During the worst regional drought in 40 years. Those rights are currently valued at between $2.5 and $3 million. Your father was a patient man. He was a very patient man." Garrett's mouth opened. He started to speak. He closed it. He started again. He said, "Mom, that is family money. We can divide that fairly. The three of us together, we can work this out." Eleanor said, "Garrett, I am going to tell you what is happening to that estate, and it is not a discussion. It is an announcement. You may leave whenever you choose. The door is where it has always been." He sat back. He did not leave. She told them. She told them about the grandchildren's trusts, about the scholarship fund in George's name, about Lorraine's $100,000, about Garrett receiving the house. She told them about Connor. Garrett stood up. His face was the color of a man who has just been told something his whole system is rejecting. He said, "That is not legal. That is not equitable. Connor has never done anything for this family. Connor is a—" Eleanor stood up. She had not stood up to one of her children in a very long time. She stood up to her full height, which was 5 feet 4 inches. And she looked at her oldest son with the expression she had used for 30 years on children who had made a choice they needed to understand the consequence of. She said, "Garrett, your brother stopped drinking in November of 2017. He paid off $18,400 in debt in 6 years on a mechanic's salary by himself without telling anyone. He visited me at Sunrise Manor every Sunday for 6 weeks. He sat in that lobby for 45 minutes every time. He brought me an apple every time. He left without seeing me every time because I told the nurses to send him away because I still did not trust him enough. And I am ashamed of that." She took a breath. She said, "You visited once. 15 minutes. You brought paperwork. Lorraine visited twice. 43 minutes total, long enough to post photographs. When I walked out of that facility at 3 in the morning in 24-degree weather and walked 1.75 miles to a bus station. You turned your phone face down, Garrett, and you poured your coffee. Lorraine, you went back to sleep. The only person who came looking for me was Connor. He drove toward Millfield, not toward Sunrise Manor, because he thought about where I would go. He found me at a bus station. He took his coat off and put it on my shoulders. He drove me to a 600-square-foot trailer where he had clean sheets waiting on a bed he had made ready 3 weeks before because he thought maybe one day I would need somewhere to go. She looked at both of them. She said, "That is who receives the larger share, not because he has the least, because he is the one who came back without being called." Those are your father's words, not mine. And your father was right. Lorraine was crying quietly. She pulled off her sunglasses and held them in her lap and let the tears come without trying to manage them for once. She said, her voice very small, "Mama, can I still call you after this?" Eleanor looked at her daughter. The little girl who had won the summer reading contest 3 years in a row and had brought the ribbons home with that particular shy brightness. The woman who had hired a lawyer to have her own mother declared incompetent. Both of those people were the same person. Eleanor had spent the winter learning to hold complexity like that without having to resolve it. She said, "You can call me Lorraine. I will answer. But you will not post photographs of our conversations. You will not share our relationship with people who do not know us. If you call me as my daughter, not as something to show people." Lorraine nodded. She said, "Okay." She said, "I am sorry, Mama." Eleanor said, "I know you are." Garrett picked up his briefcase. He walked out. He did not say goodbye. He did not look at Eleanor on his way to the door. His Lexus was out of the driveway in under 2 minutes. He would not call for 11 months. When he finally called in the following February, he said, "Mom Tyler made the honor roll." Eleanor said, "That is wonderful, Garrett." He said, "I thought you would want to know." He hung up. He called once a month after that. Short calls. But calls. It would take him a long time to find his way back to something resembling a son. It would not be the relationship Eleanor had once wanted with her oldest child. It would be the one she had. She accepted it because she had learned in the months since George's funeral that what you have and what you wanted are sometimes very different things, and the only wise response is to tend carefully to what you have. Spring came to Kansas the way it sometimes does, gently and on time in the 3rd week of March, with rain that arrived before the soil had cracked and could drink it back properly. The wheat in the fields along County Road 8 was green and low and moving in the mild wind. Eleanor sat on the porch of the farmhouse in the wicker chair George had bought at a Pratt County sale in 1998 and never once considered replacing. The cushion was flat and faded, and she had been meaning to replace it since 2015, and had not for the same reason George had not painted the ceiling stain or fixed the 3rd step. Because some things in a house become part of the house, and removing them feels like a kind of erasure. Out in the south field, Connor was on a tractor working the ground for the alfalfa he was putting in. He had planted 12 cattle in January, Angus Cross bought at auction in Hutchinson, with some of the estate money. The rest he had put in savings. He had said, "Mom, this money is not mine. It is Dad's. I am holding it for whoever needs it next." He had said it the way George would have said it, without ceremony, without looking for a response. He had given Earl Dunning $30,000, most of which Earl had used to install a new pump in his irrigation well and repair the roof of his equipment shed. Earl had cried. Connor had looked at the ground and let him. He had not said anything about it afterward, not to Eleanor, not to anyone. It was simply a thing that had been done, and that was the end of it. He had hired a young man named Dex Morrow, 24 years old, recently released from the county jail after a DUI, needing someone to give him a job before he ran out of options. Connor had given him the job without an application, without a background check, without conditions beyond showing up on time and doing the work, the same way George had once given Connor a second chance only earlier, only without the years of silence in between. Eleanor held George's letter in her hand. The paper had gone soft at the folds from being read so many times. She did not need to read it again. She held it the way you hold a thing that has said everything it has to say, and now simply needs to be held. She watched Connor on the tractor. She watched the way he moved across the field. The same patience in his body that she had watched through a church window the morning of George's funeral. The same completeness of attention. The same quality of a man who is entirely present in whatever he is doing and does not need an audience for it. Buster lay between the legs of the wicker chair in the particular boneless way of old dogs in mild sunshine. His breathing was slow and even. and his legs occasionally twitched with whatever he was chasing in his sleep. Eleanor put one hand down and rested it on his side and felt him breathe. She thought about the woman who had stood in a hallway 18 months ago with an empty glass in her hand and made a decision. She thought about what that decision had cost her and what it had given back. She had gone looking for the truth about her children, and she had found it cleanly and without ambiguity. One of them had sent her away. One of them had filmed her eating to build a case against her. And one of them had driven toward Millfield instead of toward the facility because he had thought for just a moment longer than the others about where she would actually go. She had spent 30 years calling that one a disappointment. She had been wrong for 30 years, and she was not going to spend whatever years remained in the pretense that she had not been. That was the only honest thing left, to hold it plainly, to carry it without theater and without excessive self-flagellation. The way you carry the truth about yourself when you are old enough to finally see it clearly. She looked out at this green field and the tractor moving through it, and the sky above it, that particular late winter to spring Kansas. Ski that had held her whole life in it. And she said very quietly to the air and to George, wherever George had gone, "You old fool. We were both wrong about him for so long. Maybe the only thing we got right between the two of us was him." The screen door creaked. Buster's tail moved once against the porch boards. Connor came up the steps from the yard side, having come around from the drive after parking the tractor. He had washed his hands at the outdoor spigot by the barn. He dried them on his jeans and stood for a moment beside her chair, looking out at the field the way a man looks at something he has worked hard on and is not yet finished with. Then he looked at her. He said, "Mom, beef stew sound all right to you?" She looked up at him, at the face that was George's jaw and George's eyes, and George's particular quality of stillness and all the things that had always been there that she had simply for 30 years refused to see. She said, "That sounds exactly right." He went inside. The screen door swung closed behind him. Eleanor leaned back in the wicker chair and closed her eyes and listened to the sound of the field moving in the wind, to Buster breathing at her feet, to the sounds coming from the kitchen of someone who knows their way around a pot and a stove and does not need to be watched while they work. She thought it comes back from very far away. Love does that. It travels distances that should be too great across years of silence and doors left closed, and words that should have been left unsaid, and words that should have been said and were not. It comes back quieter than it was before, but it comes back. And when it does, if you are quiet enough yourself to hear it, it sounds like someone in the kitchen at the end of a long day making something warm from nothing much at all. She sat on the porch in the wicker chair as the afternoon light moved across the field, and the wheat moved in the wind, and the new alfalfa below the fence line showed its first green, and the old dog dreamed at her feet, and the smell of beef and onion came through the screen door in the warm March air. She sat there until Connor called her name from inside. She opened her eyes. She stood up. She went in.